Welcome back to the Museum of Crime. My name is Chris Kelvin. In the mid-19th century, there were a few places that were synonymous with crime. Shanghai, London's Whitechapel district, and in New York, a place called the Five Points. And in the Five Points, there was a very special, very evil place called the Old Brewery. We'll find out all about it in just a second. In the late 1700s, New York City was a small town on the lower tip of Manhattan Island. Just outside of town, near a place called Collect Pond, a man named Coulthard built a brewery. Now, Coulthard's brewery was around for a long time. It was a really good going concern. It was a business. And as Manhattan began to grow and other business came up around it, Collect Pond started to become polluted. The brewery started losing business, and in 1835 there was a massive economic downturn. Mr. Coulthard sold the building. The building itself was turned into what would become one of New York City's first tenement houses. It was basically like an internalized shantytown. The old brewery, when it was converted into a tenement, was made into 100 separate rooms with a warren of different kinds of hallways and courtyards built inside the building. You needed a map to get through this place. The upper 3 floors were mostly given over to the Irish immigrants, and the lower 2 basements were reserved for the blacks. Now, this was not necessarily a solid arrangement. Everybody was everywhere, and all sorts of crime and all sorts of evil things happened throughout this building. We are talking murder, we are talking rape, we are talking robbery, incest, you name it. If it is against the law or against any sort of moral code, it happened inside the old brewery. This was a horrifying place with an alley that went around the entire outside of the building that became known as Murderer's Alley. Why? Guess. That's right. If you walked in, you never came out. Regular citizens, average people, never went into the old brewery. And anyone who came out was met with rocks and bricks and bats. People didn't want to know about who was inside this building. The police were afraid to go inside in numbers less than 50. That's incredible. Well, inside the building was also an area called the Den of Thieves. And yes, this is where the phrase came from. The Den of Thieves is where all the robbers and pickpockets and prostitutes congregated to do their business. The prostitutes, sometimes acting in conjunction with other members of the criminal classes, would lure their customers into the old brewery, and during the course of performing their business, someone would come out of the dark, slit the customer's throat, and they would share the profits from the customer's purse. This was a dark and evil place. Children born inside the old brewery often never saw sunlight or drew a breath of fresh air until they were well into their teens. It was a university of crime. Kids growing up in the old brewery learned how to be pickpockets and thieves and murderers. It was a horrifying place. How horrifying, you ask? Well, murders occurred there on an almost daily basis, and for 15 years they did occur there on a daily basis. Bodies were hidden in the walls, the floors, the ceilings. It must have smelled awful in there. The great unwashed and all the dead. It was terrifying. One day, a young girl, about 5 years old, got a brand new penny for her birthday and was foolish enough to show it off inside the old brewery. She was murdered right then and there for a penny. and her body was left to sit in the corner of the cold room until her malnourished mother was strong enough to use a spoon to scrape out a shallow grave in which to bury her daughter. This was a terrible place. And one day, the city of New York decided it was done. The missionaries decided that they were going to take over the old brewery, and they were going to raze it to the ground and build a new mission in its place in the 5 Points. They did. They got permission from the city. They bought the building, and the New York police came out in major force to evict the tenants of the old brewery. And when these people came out, they were like rats leaving a sinking ship. The New York police set up a cordon around the building and captured dozens and dozens of wanted criminals who had been wanted for murder and worse for years. And then once the building was empty, the workmen went in and started to break the place apart. And what did they find? Oh, they found human remains. For 15 years, as I said, there was a murder a day at the old brewery. That's 5,475 people who were killed. The workmen pulled out over 100 sacks of human bones. This is a terrible place. The old brewery was taken down, brick by brick, board by board, until it was nothing but a dirty hole. And then that dirty hole was covered over, and a new mission was put in its place, and the city started to turn around a little bit. Years later, in an ironic twist, the area that is the 5 Points is now where the New York City criminal courts are now housed. Well, that's it for this week. Interesting story of the old brewery. Next week, I will open another case file from the Museum of Crime. My name's Chris Kelvin. Thank you for watching.